The applications of the Wired Brain Coffee Company access Blob Storage with the logic that you have implemented in the Wired Brain Coffee Storage.NET Standard class library. Now everything is up and running and everybody at Wired Brain Coffee is happy. Imagine that Sarah just came to her desk and she asks you the following question. Is there a way to get some metrics for our blob storage, like for example the blob count? Of course, there is a way. Let me show you now in a demonstration how you can use the Azure portal to view and export blob metrics. So let's switch to the Azure portal. Here I've opened the blade of the Wired Brain Coffee storage account. Let's scroll down in the navigation. As you can see, there is Monitoring Classic and Monitoring. Monitoring Classic is the older way to get metrics for your storage account. It might be removed in the future. That's why we use here in this demonstration the new and recommended monitoring. So let's click here on Metrics. Here you can create a chart with metrics from your storage account. As you can see, the account is already selected here. When you click on this, you can see the subscription, the resource group and the selected Wired Brain Coffee storage account. After that, a metric namespace is selected, which is account. And now you can select a metric for that namespace. There are metrics for capacity and for transactions. So you can select, for example, the used capacity, and then you can see that I used, for example, 10.2 megabytes for my storage account, and you can see on October 21st it increased to 11.6 megabytes. You can also select a different time range when you click here. So let's do this. Let's select, for example, the last 3 days and let's click on Apply. Now you can see here I have 10.7 megabytes. And then it increased to 15.5 megabytes and it went down again to 10.4 megabytes. Of course, you can also select a custom time range to zoom in. So let's take, for example, the 18th of October as a start time and let's select the 19th of October as an end time and let's click on Apply. Now we just zoomed in where we had that peak. Now let's click again on the metric. We have selected here the account metric namespace. But when you click on this, you can see that you can select also blob, file, queue or table. So in our case, let's select blob. Now there are different metrics for the capacity. You can select the blob capacity, the blob container count and the blob count. Then you have also metrics for the transactions. So let's select, for example, the transactions and you can see on October 18th I had quite a few transactions. Now let's go again to the metric and let's select the blob count. Here you can see on that day I had 16 blobs and then I removed some, I had only 10. I think I deleted some snapshots and then I removed again some blobs and here we have only 7 blobs. What you can do now in this chart, you can add an additional metric. So let's click here on Add Metric and you can select, for example, in addition the blob container count. Now you can see on this day we had 7 blobs and 4 containers in the Wired Brain Coffee storage account. But let me remove that container count again. Besides additional metrics, you can also add a filter here. So let's do this. As you can see, you can filter by blob type. You can select here, for example, block blob and page blob. So when I select page blob, you can see we have 0 blobs. As you know, all our blobs are block blobs. So when I hover this now, I can see we have 16 blobs and 10 blobs and so on. Now let's click on the filter again. Instead of blob type, let's select here the blob tier. And you can select here, for example, cool. Now you can see on that Friday I have added 1 cool blob. When I select again the blob tier, I could say I want to include also the hot blobs. And then I can see again all the blobs in my storage account. Now instead of using a filter or in addition to a filter, you can also apply a splitting. Let me remove this filter and let's click on Apply Splitting. And let's split here by blob tier. Now you can see here that we have 6 hot blobs and 1 cool blob. This looks quite good and we can tell Sarah now about the blob count. But before we do this, let me show you some more features you have here. You can change here the chart type. So let's select, for example, an area chart. Now you can see here that the cool blob is stacked on top of the hot blobs. What you can also do, you can export the data to Excel. So let me click here and now an Excel file is downloaded. Let's open that file and let's click on Enable Editing. Let me expand the first column a bit so that we can see the dates. Let's click on the first date and let's go in Excel to View and let's freeze the pane so that we keep the header when we scroll down. Now let me scroll down and you can see, for example, here on October 19th, I removed some hot blobs. And I have also created one cool blob. So this spreadsheet is pretty cool and we can give it to Sarah so that she can see the blob count. Now let's go back to the Azure portal. What you can do in addition, you can pin that chart to the dashboard. So let's click here on Pin to Dashboard. Now let's go to my dashboard. Here you can see the created chart. And when I hover this, you can see we have currently 6 hot blobs and 1 cool blob in the Wired Brain Coffee storage account. The last thing I want to mention is that the monitoring is centralized in Azure. When you go in the navigation of the Azure portal to all services, and you filter here by monitor, you see the monitor service. So let's click on this, and this opens up the plate of that monitor service. Here on this plate, you can also click on metrics. And actually, the same view opens up like the one that you have seen already before. Here my subscription is selected. I can select the Wired Brain Coffee Storage resource group, and from that resource group, the Wired Brain Coffee Storage account. Now I can select here, for example, Blob, and I just select here the Blob capacity. And I click again on Pin to Dashboard. Now let's go back to my dashboard. Let's scroll to the right, and you can see here the new tile for the Blob capacity. You might wonder how the capacity can go up while the blob count stays the same. Imagine that you override an existing blob and you just upload a larger file. Then the blob count will stay the same and the capacity will go up. So now Sarah has all the information about their blobs. Let's wrap up now what you have learned in this course.